Employee churn is no doubt high, and possibly it's not the heady experience suggested in the TV dramas. Chris, I don't know if you've seen the reports on this, but in terms of their terms of employment, these women, can you make them do all these things?
Yeah, well, Jim, the interesting thing with this one is what I understand is what at least I think it was showgirls were doing was they were providing, presumably as part of the terms of employment, they were providing some of their entertainers with an apartment, and what it appears they were doing was linking this penalty fine system for not turning up to shifts, etc., with having to pay fines or penalties as rental penalties.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that could be sort of a clever attempt to try and get around the employment legislation, but it's going to be picked up by the tenancy legislation.
I was to say, by offending the tenancy legislation instead.
Yeah. Now, I understand, look, one of the entertainers is off to the Employment Relations Authority, so presumably there's at least an argument of an employment relationship, but I don't know whether the Employment Relations Authority will be able to determine whether these tenancy penalties fit within their scope, but certainly the Tenancy Tribunal would, and I would have thought the easiest first step would have been to refer it to Tenancy Services. It's part of the Ministry of Business and Innovation. They can look at it. Yeah, it's incredible.
It seems also, Chris, that they were trying to fine one of the girls for not turning up to a shift or for taking a sick day. So I would have thought that's completely illegal under employment law, that if somebody's entitled to take a sick day, you can't fine them if they've taken a sick day. Weren't they
trying to make the woman concerned, or any woman concerned, work an extra day if they'd called in sick on a particular day? Can you do that as well?
Surely not.
Well, no, you can't do any of that from an employment perspective. But I wonder if the argument might be, and I think it's an argument destined to fail. But the argument might be, well, no, look, we're providing free rent to these entertainers. Admittedly, we're packing 6 of them into a 2-bedroom apartment and requiring them to, share rooms, etc. And we're doing that. We're providing them, in essence, with free rent on the basis that they're going to turn up and do their shifts. Now, it's of no concern to us as a landlord whether they're sick or not, because the tenancy legislation's got nothing to do with that. That's another issue.
Yeah.
But if they're not turning up for work, well, then why should they expect to get free rent? Now, again, I think that's an argument that's destined to fail. But I wonder if that's the way they'd argue it.
Either way, I'm not going to Showgirls anymore.
What I want to know, in the criminal law area, in trials, we sometimes have views where the jury is taken off to the scene of whatever the crime is, and to have a look for themselves how the things are laid out. I'm just wondering if the tenancy tribunal or the Employment Tribunal, Remuneration Authority, are going to request a view, because it would seem to be quite important in this situation.
I'm sure there'd be a large media contingent accompanying them.
Of stressed out journalists, hyped up on caffeine and dehydrated.
And alcohol.
Chris Patterson, thank you very much.
What could possibly go wrong?
My pleasure. Have a good day.
For helping out with your legal expertise there. Jonathan Krebs has been on the panel with Josie Pagani today. Thank you both.
Thank you. I'm glad we managed to lower the tone at the last minute.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
We are back tomorrow with the panel, and thanks for your company, everybody. Checkpoint is coming right up.
Tō mai rai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhia. Well, welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight it can be revealed the case of a teenager who was sold for sex by her mother and her partner only came to light thanks to a chance meeting with a Jehovah's Witness. The Ministry for Primary Industries confirms all cases of Mycoplasma bovis can be linked back to one Southland farm. That's the cases identified so far, and we try to answer some of your M. bovis questions. Petrol prices in some parts of the country creep closer to $2.50 a litre for unleaded 91. New research shows exposing children to germs and bacteria in the first year of their lives could help prevent serious childhood illnesses. And hundreds of can-tabs turn up for free te reo lessons. We speak to one of the oldest and keenest students.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten, aho. A chance meeting with a Jehovah's Witness helped a teenager who was sold for sex by her mother help her report the exploitation to police. Casimir Lata and her partner Avnish Segal have now both been jailed for receiving earnings for sexually exploiting the teenager who was 15 when the offending started. Segal was sentenced today in the High Court in Auckland to 4 years and 8 months in prison. But the case may never have come to light if the teenager had not earlier struck up a friendship with a Jehovah's Witness who was going door to door. When the pair met up again later, the girl revealed what was happening and the woman helped her to report it to the police. It's the first of its kind in New Zealand in which someone has been jailed for sexually exploiting their child for money. Detective Inspector Colin Higson described the case as shocking.
The fact that this mother and her partner were prepared to essentially use her daughter as a commodity to raise money for the family and abuse that position of trust and abuse that relationship, that's particularly disturbing.
Detective Inspector Colin Higson. Cabinet will decide exactly how the government will deal with the Mycoplasma bovis outbreak on Monday. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern met with industry today to lay out the two options available. The first is to continue to try to eradicate the cattle disease from the country by culling animals found to be carrying it, or accept it's probably here for good and look towards making the necessary changes to the country's farming practices in order to manage it. Mr O'Connor says he'll wait to hear from industry, then make a call.
The industry leaders have indicated they'll give a clear signal to our government before Monday on the best way forward.
The Agriculture Minister and the Ministry for Primary Industries says it took 5 months to identify the farm where Mycoplasma bovis originated because the farmers involved did not keep stock records. The ministry says in that time the Southland dairy farm where the infection originated sold an unknown number of cows to farms around the country. 38 farms are now labelled as infected, stretching from Southland up to Waikato. The government is expecting a final decision overnight about whether the European Union will formally approve free trade agreement negotiations with Australia and New Zealand. The agreement would pave the way for a multi-billion-dollar deal before the United Kingdom leaves the EU in March. Plans for fast-tracked negotiations were announced by the European Commission President in September. Australian media are reporting the mandate will be approved. The Trade Minister David Parker does not want to go quite that far.
We're hoping for the best. It's on the agenda for the European Union to consider whether they give their trade negotiators a mandate to commence the free trade agreement negotiations with New Zealand. David Parker. The EU estimates a free trade deal could result in a GDP boost for New Zealand of between $1.2 and $2 billion and a 10 to 20% increase in exports. 2 complaints have been lodged with the Ombudsman over restrictions imposed by Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff on access to a report about a possible new downtown stadium. A councillor, Kathy Casey, is objecting to only being allowed access to the full report by viewing it in the Mayor's office. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nair reports.
The Ombudsman's office, in a reply to Councillor Casey, said it was considering the issue urgently. It's confirmed a second complaint has also been received. Ms Casey's asking whether the Mayor can withhold information from elected representatives by saying it's commercially sensitive. Mr Goff commissioned the pre-feasibility report at the start of last year, and a censored version was released on Friday after the Ombudsman found it had been wrongly withheld from RNZ for nearly 6 months. Councillors are also only being given an edited copy with potential locations, partners and costs blanked out. I tamaki makoro ko Todd Nair tēnei.
Roads in and out in and around the Mossburn area in Southland have been affected by flooding as wild weather batters parts of the south. Motorists in northern Southland are advised to take care. In central Otago, parts of State Highway 6 between Cromwell and Makarora are also flooded. And the Crown Range between Queenstown and Wanaka was blocked this afternoon after some motorists became stuck in snow. Severe weather warnings for heavy rain and high winds remain in place in many parts of the lower South Island. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. The Commonwealth Games boxing champion David Nika had all but given up on getting back his stolen gold medal. But today, 3 weeks after it was taken from his car in Hamilton, the police called him to say they've recovered it. And it was still in good nick, which came as quite a shock to Nika.
The fact that it had been gone for 3 weeks and, something like that, if it were me, I would have gotten rid of it. So I'd already organised a replacement medal. It was actually on its way here. But the fact that it's found its way back it's amazing.
David Nika. 2 days after being named in the All Blacks for the first time, Shannon Frizzell is still coming to terms with his swift rise in the rugby world. Frizzell had his first taste of training with the squad in Auckland today in preparation for the 3-test series against France next month. The 24-year-old Highlanders loose forward has played just 9 Super Rugby matches and says he never dreamt he'd make the All Blacks so soon.
I wasn't expecting to be here. My focus for this year was to be for Highlanders and just to learn as much as again. And now I'm here in the All Black environment. Pretty much I'll look to do the same.
Shannon Frizzell. The Mainland Tactics have lost captain and defender Jess McLennan for the rest of the ANZ Premiership netball season due to a knee ligament injury she suffered in the side's recent loss to the Pulse. The Silver Ferns defender Jane Watson will now lead the side. That's the news.
Maori wards rejected.
It wasn't just Maori who were out there supporting it. There was a lot of non-Maori and Pākehā.
Te reo lessons welcomed.
Tika tau, me te aha kai te tino harikoa, ahau, mātako taku whānau, I te nui, te toko maha o ngā tāngata I tae mai, I nā pō ki te whakaako I tō tātou reo ka mehameha.
Can't please everyone. David says if we wanted to tune into a te reo Māori radio station, we would stop shoving it down our throats. Mā te manu moata, ka mau ai te toke. The early bird catches the worm. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, prostate cancer survivors with erectile dysfunction say they're paying too much for Viagra and ask Pharmac to step in. And after 10, Anote Tong, the former president of Kiribati, on saving his sinking island nation from climate change. Join Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered showers turning to rain and squally thunderstorms for a time overnight. Further showers tomorrow and with thunderstorms and hail north of Levin. Localised damaging wind gusts from late evening until early tomorrow morning. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine today, northwest gales in exposed places tonight. Tomorrow, a period of early rain, then fine breaks and isolated showers. For Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain and thunderstorms for a time this evening, showers retreating to the ranges tomorrow. Northwest gales severe in exposed places until tonight. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms easing this evening. Further thunderstorms with hail overnight and tomorrow morning, then clearing south of Hokitika. The Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain in the west, spreading elsewhere at times today. Showers tomorrow with snow lowering to 300 to 400 metres in Otago and Southland. Northwest gales in exposed places easing today. The Chatham Islands, fine spells at first with rain developing tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up, Mycoplasma bovis. We attempt to answer some of the questions you asked us last night. It really is a tricky little bacteria. Te reo lessons in Christchurch. We talked to a Pākehā man in his 70s who decided it's never too late to learn and explains why. And Colombian refugees in Invercargill. All of that and much more. But we begin tonight with a case of a teenager who was sold for sex by her own mother and her partner. Offending which only came to light through a chance meeting with a Jehovah's Witness. At the High Court in Auckland today, the partner, Avnish Segal, was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison. Kazmir Lata was last month jailed for 6 years and 11 months for sexually exploiting her then 15-year-old daughter. That's a sentence the Crown is now appealing. Jessie Chang reports.
The Jehovah's Witness met Lata's daughter while she was knocking on doors in the teenager's neighbourhood. RNZ understands the pair formed a friendship and attended church together before the offending happened. After the teenager was forced to have sex about 1,000 times for money over an 18-month period, she reconnected with the Jehovah's Witness and began telling her what had happened. With her help, the teenager then went to police to tell them about the sexual exploitation. Today, more than a year later, both her tormentors have been jailed. Avnish Segal had his eyes lowered to the ground for most of his sentencing, only looking up to communicate with his translator and lawyer. Segal was supposed to stand trial in mid-April, but just 6 days before it was due to start, he was arrested at Auckland Airport, trying to board a flight to India. He then pleaded guilty for receiving earnings and sexually exploiting Lata's daughter. Justice Lang told Segal he knew the teenager was vulnerable, but he still used her.
You assisted the victim's mother to perpetrate the offending against her own daughter. You must have known the gross breach of trust that was being committed here.
Segal paid for some of the advertisements advertising the teenager as a prostitute, occasionally drove her to have sex with clients, and put her earnings into his bank account. Crown Prosecutor Natalie Walker argued those actions condemned him as someone actively helping to sell the teenager for sex.
The offender, Mr. Segal, played a key role in this offending by providing necessary assistance in the form of transport and access to legitimate bank accounts and to deposit cash and make advertising payments.
It's estimated the teenager made about $100,000 from prostitution, about half of which was pocketed by Lata and Segal. Ms Walker said without Segal, the offending wouldn't have occurred, but defence lawyer Graham Newell disputed that.
Well, accepting that Mr Segal assisted the offending, who's really an aider and abettor to the principal Ms Lata, he allowed his bank accounts to be used because Ms Lata was unable to open one. It's not accepted that Mr Segal was essential for Ms Lata's offending to occur.
Mr Newell said Segal is likely to be deported to India after he served his sentence. Justice Lang told the 26-year-old he played a significant role in harming the teenager and that normal parole conditions would be inadequate. He gave a minimum sentence of 2 years and 4 months. Speaking after the sentencing, Detective Inspector Colin Higson described the case as shocking.
The fact that this mother and her partner were prepared to essentially use her daughter as a commodity to raise money for the family and abuse that position of trust and abuse that relationship, that's particularly disturbing.
Colin Higson hopes the jailing of Lata and Segal will spur any other vulnerable individuals to talk to police. Lata was jailed for nearly 7 years with a minimum sentence of 3 years and 5 months. The Crown has since moved to appeal that on the grounds that it is manifestly inadequate. Lata's sentence was the first of its kind in New Zealand where someone was jailed for sexually exploiting their child for money. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, Kōjisi Chang Tierney.
MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries, has confirmed this afternoon that all known cases of Mycoplasma bovis, the cases identified so far, can be linked back to the Southland farm owned by Alphonse Zestraten. Tonight we look at how the disease managed to spread such a long way from Southland to South Canterbury, then up to Waikato and almost certainly, as we'll hear later in the program, to Northland. Later we respond to some of the questions about M. bovis you asked us last night. Why is it so difficult to contain? But first it now appears MPI was looking in the wrong part of the country and only managed to find the original infected farm 5 months after the disease was first detected in the country. Conan Young reports.
M. bovis was first detected in July last year on the South Canterbury farm owned by the Van Leeuwen Dairy Group. Attempts to control its spread were focused on this farm and all of the properties who had received cows and calves from it. Tonight, MPI has confirmed that the infection can in fact be linked back to another farm in another part of the country, the one owned by Alphonse Zestraten in Southland. The problem is, this farm was not declared to be an infected property until December last year, 5 months after M. bovis was first identified in New Zealand. This allowed a large number of cows and calves to be traded from the Zestraten property to farmers around the country who had no idea they were taking in infected cattle. MPI's Director of Response, Jeff Gwynn, says the reason it took 5 months to establish a connection between the South Canterbury farm and the one in Southland is that the infected livestock went through 2 to 3 intermediaries, none of which used the animal tracing system known as NATE. Asked if MPI had apologised to the Van Leeuwens for naming them as the original farm, he said it was the Van Leeuwens and not MPI who first identified them.
We work with them and talk them through, why we think it's a good idea they should talk to their neighbours and why they should, go public with their name, but we don't actually name and shame So in the Van Leeuwen's instance, they named themselves.
Jeff Gwynn says he was working with the best information he had at the time when he talked about the Van Leeuwen's being the original farm.
It is a fair comment to say that we probably did say somewhere along the way, or I would have said, that they were the first farm, and at that point in time that would have been an accurate statement, until such time as we found the Z stratum, which indicates, or the genetic information we have available indicates that the point of introduction on their farm was earlier or predates the Van Leeuwen's.
Meanwhile, the Minister for MPI, Damien O'Connor, says a decision will be made on Monday about whether M. bovis will be managed or whether an attempt will be made to eradicate it completely. He says both options were put to industry leaders today.
They've got to go back and talk with their organisations, taking on board all the information that they've shared and discussed today. I think it's been a very useful meeting. I think they're in a better position to talk to their organisations and come back to government prior to Monday, so that when we do make a decision at cabinet level, it'll be the best decision we possibly can make for New Zealand farmers.
Mr O'Connor is expecting a briefing within the next month on how the joint police and MPI investigation into how the disease entered the country is going. For Checkpoint, ko Conan Young Tene.
And Alphonse Z. Stratton has declined to be interviewed. Nathan Guy was the Minister for Primary Industries when M. bovis was first detected in July last year on the South Canterbury farm owned by the Van Leeuwen Dairy Group. He declined to be interviewed today, but this is what he had to say on the Parliamentary Bridge this afternoon.
Good on the Prime Minister getting on the ground and meeting farmers yesterday in the Waikato. I thought that was very good. It does show that the government is taking it seriously. I've had some concerns that they've been acting a little bit slowly, been raising concerns on behalf of farmers from around the country. But I certainly get the sense now that government realise this issue is quite big. Farmers want certainty. They realise there's a whole lot of movement of animals that have already started actually. A lot happened around the end of this month, so the clock is ticking.
The clock most certainly is ticking. That was Nathan Guy, who wouldn't appear on Checkpoint tonight but did speak to reporters at Parliament earlier. Later in the programme, after 6 o'clock, we're going to look at length at Mycoplasma bovis and try and respond to some of the questions you raised last night. That's after 6. We're calling it a Townie's Guide to M. bovis. If you're interested, we hope you will listen. Right, cleanliness might be next to godliness, but scientists in the UK believe an overly sterile, germ-free environment in a child's first year of life could be a factor in one of the most common types of childhood cancer, leukemia. The study, viewed as controversial by some at the Institute of Cancer Research in London, found not being exposed to germs early on can affect a child's immune system and make them vulnerable to illnesses like the flu. That, combined with unlucky genetics, can mix and cause cancer or greater risk of cancer, as the BBC's James Gallagher reports.
Hugo has a cancerous immune system. He was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when he was 2, and the disease means he has difficulty walking. He's now in his 3rd year of chemotherapy.
It's all he's ever known. But yes, certainly the early part of his treatment was really gruelling. All the side effects that you'd expect: vomiting, hair loss, tiredness, lack of appetite.
Hugo's type of leukemia is more common in affluent societies, but the reason why has been hotly debated. Now scientists think they have the answer. It starts with a genetic mutation in the womb. Then, in the first year of life, a lack of exposure to microbes fails to train the immune system correctly. So if there's an infection in childhood, the immune system malfunctions and it can lead to leukemia. Part of the problem is how sterile and germ-free our lives have become, but the researchers say using bacteria may prevent the disease.
If all of our conclusions are correct, it should be preventable by exposing young infants to benign bacteria, which primes the immune system adequately.
Coming into contact with beneficial bacteria is complicated. Playing with other children, having older siblings, going to nursery and being breastfed all play a major role. It's not just about embracing dirt.
I think you have to let the odd toy which drops on the ground go and just sort of say, well, that's that, and not get too sort of caught up in it.
I just believe sometimes it's good to have some germs around. Probably it's better for immune system.
This study adds to growing recognition that bacteria are vital for our health and well-being. Failing to train the immune system has been linked to diseases from type 1 diabetes to allergies and now leukemia. But this is absolutely not about blaming parents. It's an acknowledgement that the progress we're making as a society and in medicine comes at a price.
It was the BBC's James Gallagher reporting. Now, just a warning before we continue. Our next story contains graphic details that may be unsuitable for a younger audience if you are listening with children. A Kapiti Coast counsellor accused of indecently assaulting a staffer had his penis measured by a doctor to dispute the complainant's description of its length. David Scott, who is 71, is accused of rubbing his genitals against the staff member during morning tea. Judge Peter Hobbs suppressed details of the measurement, but in an early interview with police, Mr Scott categorically denied that the incident occurred and says he's never told a lie in his life. Anne-Marie May has been at the trial.
In the video interview with Detective Vanessa Canine, David Scott said he did not recall pushing past the woman, but would have said excuse me if he had done so. He said immediately before entering the room he had gone to a toilet to inject insulin as he was diabetic, and that would also have stopped him pushing past anyone.
I would have been protective, not only for the injections I just put in, because I had severe bruising, but also because I'd had circumcision 15 weeks before and lost a lot of my penis. It was cut off, cancer.
David Scott told the detective he did not even remember seeing the complainant in the room. He said it was physically impossible for his groin to have touched her, and he had several items in his pockets, including his wallet, phone and keys.
So you're saying, regardless of anything else, it wasn't physically possible for you to have done this because you've had a circumcision at the end of November or at the start of December, and you still had 2 stitches which were red and sore?
Red and sore, yeah.
And you had bruising around your stomach?
Well, I showed them that, and I took photos of that. Well, those photos show you if you wish to see them.
In the videotaped interview, Detective Canine took the proffered photos and showed them to the camera so they could be seen on the tape. David Scott gave evidence in his own defence this afternoon, telling the court he had no recollection of grabbing the complainant and grinding against her for a couple of seconds before moving on. He said he had the greatest respect for women and had done many things for them, including starting the Women's Refuge in Paraparaumu. In response to questions from the Crown prosecutor Kate Feltham, he said he became upset when he realised the staff member was alleging he had committed a deliberate act of indecency. Mr Scott said his request that she take his apology in friendship and understanding was just a turn of phrase which meant nothing, leading to this exchange between him and Ms Feltham.
Wasn't you hoping that once you'd apologised that she may decide not to take her complaint any further?
I wasn't apologising about bumping. I was apologising for her being upset, for her imaginative belief that I had bumped her, which I hadn't. Used my genitals, which I hadn't.
The Crown and Defence are expected to give their closing addresses tomorrow morning, with the jury likely to retire to deliberate on its verdict later in the day. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
23 minutes past 5. Should people recently released from prison who are out on parole or people on bail be allowed to stay in a state house? National says no, but the Justice Minister Andrew Little says people on bail and parole are routinely being told they can't stay in state houses, they have to remain in prison, putting even more stress on an already straining system. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says there is no set policy at his ministry to turn these people away. However, he will have a look at what's happening. Now, the government has ruled out building a new mega prison, but is still considering what it will do to contain the country's growing prison population. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
While Housing New Zealand doesn't have a formal policy of refusing people on bail or on parole, Andrew Little says it's happening anyway.
I am having this raised routinely with me by lawyers at the coalface, defence lawyers and Crown prosecutors, telling me that applications for bail to a Housing New Zealand address are being routinely denied by Housing New Zealand. The policy is Housing New Zealand has to give approval, and people on the coalface are telling me that approval is routinely withheld.
But National's housing spokesperson Judith Collins is not keen on people going to stay in state houses either on parole or bail.
If you go and bail a violent offender back to the same home where he has been violent, you're actually putting a lot of people at risk.
Judith Collins says the policy change could mean violent offenders get preference on the social housing list over families who need a home. But Andrew Little says that's a typical Judith Collins misunderstanding.
This is about people who have family or whānau who are in a Housing New Zealand house. that is a suitable place for them to be bailed to for kind of stability, bit of peace. It's safe and secure for them, it's safe and secure for the community. This is not about alleged offenders leaping some sort of mythological Judith Collins queue.
The Housing Minister Phil Twyford says the agency doesn't have a blanket ban on people either on bail or parole, but he says he and Andrew Little are going to have a closer look at what's going on.
Whether in fact there may be some practical or unintended issues that get in the way of people who are coming out of prison or on bail getting decent housing.
Including staff attitude.
Well, I have no reason to think that's a problem, but yeah, we're going to look at the whole thing and see what we can do.
Meanwhile, a suite of changes for the criminal justice system should be unveiled within a month or two of a big summit at the end of August. Andrew Little says he's looking at a broad package, including how to safely house some offenders on bail or parole in the community, improve rehabilitation and reduce reoffending rates. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwalaho.
Almost 26 minutes past 5. Petrol prices, many of you may have noticed, have gone up across the country over the past week as global trade issues forced the price of oil to its highest point since 2014. Some weakness in the Kiwi dollar too material in this. But in some parts of New Zealand, prices have absolutely skyrocketed. Unleaded 91 in Wanaka is $2.44 a litre today, 22% higher than the cheapest petrol in Auckland, which is today $2 flat. Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says it's horrifying and needs to be fixed.
Price increases in recent times in our part of the world have been 3 times what they've been in centres farther north, and I just can't understand that. I think we're suffering from a relatively small population, a fewer number of gas stations where competition is perhaps less, and I think we're being punished for that.
You guys are hitting nearly $2.50 a litre for 91 down there at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. And, look, I filled up one of my vehicles the other night and, I had to take a double take when I looked at the pump to see what it was costing me. It was horrifying.
Can people afford to be using their cars when petrol is around $2.50? I mean, I know for me, I'm pretty fortunate. I live in central Auckland and don't need to drive that much. But if I did, $2.50 a litre, that would really be hurting me right now.
Oh, look, people aren't saying they can't afford to use their cars, but they are very grumpy about it. They're reading the fact that folk elsewhere in the country are paying a whole lot less. We know there is a transport charge in getting fuel here, but that doesn't answer why our price increases are 3 times everywhere else. They're pretty unhappy.
Is pretty unhappy putting it a little bit politely?
Yeah, look, it probably is. I'd say there's a few people telling me they're filthy about it.
Yeah, and for those people around your parts who need to drive because, there might not be a bus that goes through the area they live in, people who live out quite rural, it's probably hitting them quite hard at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, and look, we have a lot of shift workers in our district, folk who have to work in hotels overnight, etc. So, there's not a bus that goes at 3 a.m. in the morning, for example.
Just lastly, Jim, do you have any message for Megan Woods? She's looking into these petrol prices at the moment and what the petrol companies are doing.
Oh, I would say, look, it's something that they need to have a hard look at. It's just treating people at one part of the country very unfairly.
Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt speaking to our reporter Zach Fleming. But Megan Woods, who you just heard mentioned there, the Energy Resources Minister said today that drivers unfortunately have to be patient while the necessary legislation goes through Parliament.
The legislation for the market study powers has already been through its first reading, so that's working its way through its system. We've moved really fast on that piece of legislation. But look, I am discussing with officials whether there's anything we can do in the interim. Unfortunately, most of the solutions do actually require us to have the information that will get through the market studies powers.
What's your message to motorists?
Oh, look, we are really concerned. We want reassurance that people are paying a fair price when they fill up their cars, and that we're doing the work to make sure that we have all the information that we need so that we can give people those reassurances.
Energy and Resources Minister Megan Woods. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. We'd love to know what the price of petrol is where you fill up. It does seem really outrageously expensive in central Otago there. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Speaking of texts and tweets and Facebooks and emails, we heard from a lot of you last night asking questions about Mycoplasma bovis. We try to answer some of them after 6. Coming up before 6, 72 seconds of silence, 1 second for each victim, on the opening of the public inquiry into London's Grenfell Tower's tragedy. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex released their official wedding photos. By golly, that's two sides of the English coin, isn't it? And hundreds of Christchurch Cafe customers turn up for free te reo classes. We speak to one of the oldest and keenest students about why he went. But before it all, with the time at 5:30, ladies and gentlemen, the 5:30 headlines with Katrina Batten.
A teenager who was sold for sex by her mother was helped by a Jehovah's Witness she befriended to report the exploitation to police. Kazmir Lata and her partner Avnish Segal have both been jailed for earning money from sexually exploiting the girl, who was 15 when the offending started. Segal was sentenced today in the High Court in Auckland to 4 years and 8 months in prison. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says he's hearing regularly that Housing New Zealand is refusing to take in people who are on bail or parole. The government has ruled out building a new mega prison and is considering how to contain the burgeoning prison population. That includes managing people eligible for bail but who don't have a suitable house to go to. The agency says it's always housed people on remand or bail if they're existing tenants or a family member or friend of an existing tenant. Cabinet will decide on Monday how the government will deal with the Mycoplasma bovis outbreak. The Agriculture Minister and the Prime Minister have laid out the two options to farmers today, whether it will be managed or whether to continue killing infected cattle in an effort to get rid of the disease. Meanwhile, MPI says because the farmers involved did not keep records, it took 5 months to identify the farm where Mycoplasma bovis originated. A final decision is expected overnight on whether the European Union will formally approve free trade agreement talks with Australia and New Zealand. It would pave the way for a multi-billion-dollar deal before Britain leaves the EU in March next year. The Trade Minister, David Parker, says he's hoping the EU will give their trade negotiators a mandate to start free trade talks with this country. Air New Zealand says a faulty indicator light was the reason why a flight circled Tauranga Airport for almost 2 hours last night. It made several passes above the airfield so the control tower could make a visual check of the landing gear. It says the pilots briefed passengers twice while in the air. Air New Zealand did not respond to a passenger's criticism about the lack of information from crew. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, which is 27 and a half minutes away. Let's do business now. We're joined by Emile Donovan from Wellington. Kia ora, Emile. Steel and Tube trading halts. I see they closed the last trade at $1.98.
Yeah, that's right. So
what's all this about?
Sorry, trying to cut across you there, but basically this is a kind of watch this space kind of story. It's going to change quite significantly over the next 24 hours, or at least we'll have some closure over the next 24 hours. So Steel and Tube, which of course is a building supplies company, it's been rebuilding a bit after some spanners were thrown into the works over the past few months. Its profits slid last year. It's also had to bear the costs of a restructure and prosecution for mislabelling steel mesh. It pleaded guilty to 24 charges of that, and it's yet to find out the penalty for that as well, so that might complicate things too. Now, all this led to its first half profit slumping quite considerably, but the company was still fairly sure that it was going to match last year's earnings of $31 million. Now, that might not be the case. The board is finishing up a review of the company's financial performance at the moment. There could be some nasty surprises in there that might affect the bottom line, hence the trading halt. Now, Steel and Tube, we're expecting a statement from them before the markets open tomorrow. So again, there could be more on this in the next 24 hours or so.
Well, yeah, do update us tomorrow night. I see they're only down in terms of share price. They're only down 5.7% this year. So they haven't taken a bath in the context of some of the attention they've had. It'll be fascinating to see what happens tomorrow. Thanks, Emile. It's been a bit of a gloomy old business for a week or two now, but some good news for prospective home buyers, I understand.
That's right, yeah. So this is from ASB Bank's quarterly Property Confidence Index. Now basically that surveys people around the country about whether they think property values are going to rise, about whether it's a good time to buy a house or not, and so on and so forth. Now, the good news for buyers is that the percentage of people expecting prices to rise is at plus 32 points net. Now, that sounds like quite a lot, but it's actually 10 points lower than it was at this point last year. Now, the economists that we talk to about this basically say, reading into that the pace of price increases has passed its peak. That doesn't mean that values aren't going to increase. It just means that the speed of increase is slowing up a little bit, and that matches what we're kind of seeing in terms of property value increases as well. While that 32% number is higher than it was in January, much of that growth has actually come from the regions rather than the urban centres. So Auckland and Christchurch prices, for example, are expected to go up very little compared to some places in the regions, which are kind of playing catch up to those urban centres, which of course skyrocketed in price really quickly. So all told, ASB reckons conditions could be pretty favourable for property buyers in the near future. So there you go.
Yeah, although I guess they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they're desperate to lend money to people. But yeah, the facts are facts. It'll be interesting to see what happens with interest rates too over the next 18 months or so, which is very material if you're buying a first home, isn't it? Hey, what happened on the markets?
NZX50 is down fractionally 2 points. That's 0.02%. It ended on 8613, and the dollar is pretty steady, really, buying 69.4 US cents, 91.6 Australian, and 51.7 pence.
Emile Donovan off home for a glass of whiskey. Thank you very much indeed. Emile last night updating us on the cost of the most expensive bottle of whiskey ever sold, and that prompted quite a few descriptions of your favourite whiskey from viewers and listeners, from which we can conclude that you do like a drink, some of you. It's 24 minutes to 6. Let's go back to the UK. 72 sounds of silence, 72 seconds of silence opened the public inquiry into London's Grenfell Towers tragedy, a second for each of the victims. The 24-storey residential tower block in North Kensington was engulfed in flames last June. Live footage went around the world as millions watched on in horror. Absolutely terrible. The first phase of the inquest gives family members of the victims an opportunity to tell personal stories about those killed in the fire. The BBC's Tim Allman was there and has this report.
For the inquiry chairman, the pictures, videos, memories and emotions presented by the bereaved are as much evidence as the technical detail which will come. Putting them first means this inquiry begins with a clear expression of the lives lost that night. Starting with the youngest. Logan Gomez was stillborn to his mother Andrea as she lay in a coma following the fire, his father Marcio by her side. As he spoke today, the inquiry was shown an ultrasound image of his lost child.
So I held my son in my arms that evening, hoping it was all a bad dream, wishing, praying for any kind of miracle, that he would just open his eyes, move, make a sound. But as we know, that never happened.
With pictures and videos projected on large screens, some relatives gave detailed and heartfelt accounts of the lives of their loved ones. Sam Daniels made a much shorter statement.
My father, Joseph Daniels, moved to London in 1982, and Grenfell Tower had been his only home since then. The events of that night took his life and all trace of his existence in this world. He never stood a chance of getting out. It should never have happened.
Grenfell's lost lives included those of Khadija Say, a talented photographer who attended rugby school, and Dennis Murphy, described as the linchpin of his family. The inquiry also heard the last phone call from the burning flat of Mohammed Nader. Goodbye, he said. We are now leaving the world. Goodbye. I hope I haven't disappointed you. Goodbye to all. The inquiry chairman listened to each submission.
Thank you very much. That was very moving, and it must have been very difficult for you, and I'm very grateful that you came to tell us about Logan. Thank you so much.
He made no apologies for the length of time the commemoration will take. The inquiry believes this is vital work to ensure those involved do not risk losing sight of why they are doing it.
That report from the BBC. Petrol prices, boy oh boy, they're coming in. Mobile Wellsford, $2.06 for 91. Mobile Whangarei, which is not that far north of Wellsford, $2.13, and is also, of course, closer to Marsden Point, isn't it? Nuts. Richmond, $2.29. Why not $2.30? Oh, it's $2.29.9. Why not $2.30? Do they think we're stupid? Says Tony. Yes, Tony, at 0.1 cent. $2.27 a litre at Ashburton. Hi, John, our EV costs $2.50 to fill, good for 90k. What petrol price rise, says Tony. On Sunday, I live in $1.97 at Gallon. At the same time in Plymerton, which is, 45 minutes south of Levin. $2.29 at BP. Someone is ripping us off, says Dennis. Hi, John, petrol is $2.26 per litre here in Dargaville, cheaper in Whangarei and Mangatoroto. Hi, John, just check the petrol price in Sydney, $1.52 per litre of 91. I shouldn't be that surprised, I guess. I'm just back from Toronto, this person said, where petrol just reached $1.40 a litre. 91 is $2.29 a litre in Christchurch, says Simon. Once again, that huge regional variety, but as we looked at on Checkpoint a few weeks ago, varieties within regions too, particularly in Northland and that stretch of coast north of Wellington. Lovely to hear from you all. Thank you. Gosh, we were just looking at Grenfell Towers. We're not travelling too far now as the crow flies. London, an extraordinary city of very diverse experiences. Later tonight our time, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, now the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, which is, of course, south of London, will undertake their first royal duties as a married couple. They've also just released their official wedding photos. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell has the details.
Relaxing in Windsor Castle, all the principal players, bride and groom, their close family, and the bridesmaids and page boys. Standing to the couple's left is Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, who made such a deep impression at the wedding with her poise and dignity. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are seated in front of Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall. Among the bridesmaids and page boys, Prince George is smiling, Princess Charlotte is sitting on her mother's lap. The second picture shows Harry and Meghan in a more relaxed pose with their young attendants. George has an even bigger smile. Charlotte is sitting on the floor holding one of the bouquets. The third photograph is a black and white portrait of the bride and groom looking very happy on the East Terrace of Windsor Castle. So what do people make of the pictures?
To see a woman of colour in the royal family, which inherently has been white, that acceptance, it does mean there's a step forward.
That's the Commonwealth's history, our history, and a bit of history in the making.
It was nice to see Philip about as well.
For the Queen, visiting the Chelsea Flower Show this evening, the wedding and the positive reactions to its images of diversity will surely be a matter of relief. She knows that the family's younger generation is stepping forward now, and it seems well equipped for the future.
That was Nicholas Witchell reporting from the BBC. Residents on Hawaii's Big Island are being warned to stay indoors with the windows closed to limit their exposure to toxic gases. Mount Kilauea began erupting on May the 3rd and is showing no signs of slowing. Fountains of glowing lava are spurting into the air while rivers of molten and burning rock are flowing into the sea. 2,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. The BBC's Chris Buckler is covering the eruption and filed this report.
After erupting from deep beneath the ground of this island, lava has now reached the ocean. And to get here, it has destroyed all in its path. Molten rock stands more than 20 feet high, where it has claimed the land, still burning and still deeply dangerous. The smoke and fumes are toxic, but that's not the only worry. Sections of this scorched surface are still being split apart.
What we're concerned about is that there is the possibility of additional fissures opening up, or even lava that might be traveling in tubes under the surface that could spring up elsewhere.
Yet some living close to where the lava is continuing to jet out at a ferocious rate haven't left their homes. Kilauea has long been their neighbour, a volcano that erupted to create this land. but it is now destroying what is on it, and many have taken the decision to abandon their houses.
For many days I was sitting down at my house thinking that I didn't have to leave, and then the activity increased enormously.
Even to get into the evacuation area, we had to be escorted by the Hawaii National Guard.
Thanks very much.
And all who live near Kilauea know they can't ignore the volcano.
You could hear the fissures, you could hear the explosions all night and all day. Lately we've had about 100 earthquakes a day. The biggest one we had so far was 6.9.
This is a spectacular landscape, but beneath these craters it is continuing to be shaped. And with Kilauea still erupting, no one can be sure that the many prayers to the gods will be answered.
It was Chris Buckler from Hawaii for the BBC. Let's return to petrol price feedback. This one from Ash. Hi John, didn't the previous Energy Minister Judith Collins have a good hard look at disparate fuel pricing around the country? Different year, different government, same excrement. Tell us what you really think, Ash. But we are getting a lot of feedback on this and we appreciate it. In fact, I don't think Ash is the only person who regards the whole business as excrement. Ashurst, Allied 91, is $1.95 in Ashurst. 91 is $2.24.9 at home in Ahipara, which is the west coast of the far north. Approximately 2 cents per litre cheaper in Kaitaia, 15k away. It's always been a roar up in north and South Shelley. It is amazing, isn't it? In Ashurst, 91 is $1.95.9, so $1.96. In Ahipara, it's $2.25. Last week in Dubbo, New South Wales, 500k inland from Sydney, I paid $1.39 a litre for 91 petrol. Today I paid $2.13 in Masterton, nearly $2.50 in Wanaka is a rort. Waiheke drivers are paying over $2.50 now, says Carol. Waiheke, of course, is just off Auckland. Can someone please explain the correlation between oil price and fuel price? Asks Reese. Yes, we'll get someone to do that. We might actually ask Emil to do that tomorrow night. Bless you if you're listening, Emil. Last time the petrol price was high, oil was at $140 a barrel. Currently the oil price is approximately $70 a barrel. How does that work? Will be seriously scary if oil hits its previous highs. We could be looking at $4 a litre for 91. Somehow we need to break the fuel model and oil dependence fast. Reese, they are very good questions and very good facts. Emil Donovan, if you are listening, Reese wants an answer from you tomorrow night at 5:30. But we will, if Emil can't answer it, I'll try to. Ladies and gentlemen, don't hold your breath. Right, let's go to Invercargill. Imagine living in a country gripped by civil war for more than half a century, a conflict that's left more than 200,000 people dead and displaced millions more. That's the lot of Colombia, which isn't a country you hear much about in New Zealand. But in the last 3 months, a small but growing number of Colombian refugees have moved to Invercargill for a second chance, a chance to live in peace. Our Otago Southern reporter, Timothy Brown, went there to meet the Medina Osorio family.
I like Invercargill because it's not it's not a big city, but have everything that I need. For example, the boats, the library, the cinema, yeah, I have many things. I like Invercargill.
Despite growing up a world away from Invercargill in the southern province of Caqueta in Colombia, 18-year-old Mikey Medina has quickly embraced Kiwi life. He has only been speaking English for a few months, but has already learnt enough to tell me of his love of school and music, and Invercargill. The city once derided as the arsehole of the world by the Rolling Stones is paradise to the Medina family. Wilson Medina, Jacquelina Osorio, and their children aged 11, 14, 16 and 18 were forced to flee their home in the war-torn southern province of Caqueta in 2016. Caqueta is one of the main areas where coca, from which cocaine is extracted, is cultivated. It's also long been considered a stronghold of the left-wing FARC rebels, and for years was the main stage for violent combat between the guerrillas, far-right paramilitaries, and the armed forces. Jacquelina explains through a translator what life was like there.
It's different like in Syria or in other countries. You have a war and you know who is who. but in Colombia we kill between us, and I suffering rapes and very hard for me. So I know more people have more deep and complex problem that we have. The government of Colombia is blind. They don't care. The government in Colombia just have the power, and for the victims for the conflict is just pushed to one side.
But despite the violence, it was still heartbreaking for the Medinas to leave Colombia, as it also meant leaving friends and family. But their hearts are beginning to heal as they adjust to their new home. Is Colombia still home?
Oh, claro. Y es Invercargill ya, Colombia.
Yeah, it's Invercargill, Colombia. I still love my country with all my heart and everything after all the bad things happened to me over there, but I have in my blood the love for my country.
It helps that about 30 Colombian refugees now call Invercargill home, and that will increase to 90 by the end of the year. Red Cross's Southern Humanitarian Services Manager, Sue Price, says the refugees have taken to their adopted city with gusto and have put their best foot forward in joining the community. She says the weather has been the least of their concerns.
One or two of them have spoken to me through an interpreter and have said it's not the coldness of the climate that they're even thinking about. It's the warmth of the welcome that they've been getting. They'd rather be safe and happy somewhere a little cooler.
As my day with Wilson, Jacqueline and their children comes to an end, I ask if they have anything else they want to say.
See you tomorrow.
No, Invercargill, city, good.
Very, very good.
For now, the family is focused on learning English, with Wilson and Jacqueline spending their days focusing on mastering the language while their children are at school. In Invercargill, Para Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Nice, Timothy. Invercargill, good. Very, very good. Lovely. I've just heard from Catherine. He says, John, you haven't suggested that moving to electric vehicles would avoid the problems of a volatile oil price and the exchange rate of our dollar. Shame on you, with 2 exclamation marks. Sorry, Catherine, I don't know what came over me. But then Catherine offered me a lift in her EV. I'll take you up on that, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. Right, this morning on Morning Report, there was a wonderful conversation between restaurant owner Anton Matthews and Guy Nespina about a free te reo Māori class Anton is offering in Christchurch. Anton and Guy both speak Māori beautifully, but the class is for people who don't. Now, Anton thought a few people would come. Hundreds turned up, and among them was Jimmy Lecomte, the father of one of our very special listeners, Paul. Now, Jimmy isn't fluent or even close to close, but that's the point. He wants to know more, and he reckons, to paraphrase Martha Gellhorn, our responsibility is the effort. So we called him. Jim, it's John. Hear me, it's Hone. Kate te pēhea koe. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, John. Kia ora to you.
It's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
And so what did you do last night?
We learned some vowels and we learned some words, how to say the words properly, and he gave us some of the meanings of it, sort of thing, and he just explained different things, and he also said that give it a go saying these things. He says it might not sound right, he says, but at least if someone hears you, they know you're trying to say it anyway. And he says it's better to do, to have a go at it than not try it at all. What the main reason why I'm taking it on is I'd like to be able to say a few, in a conversation, just to be able to say a few sentences. I know quite a few words, but put them together in a sentence, that's what I need to know how to do that, to say sort of something in a, to talk to someone and ask them how they're doing and things like that. And that's what I need to know, how to do it properly. But no, it was very interesting. It was only for an hour. He's got 3 more nights of it. I think he was very surprised. It was originally going to happen in his restaurant. He thought he'd only get a dozen or more. And they told me last night there was about 500. I thought there was 300 to 400, but I heard there was about 500 there. So it just shows you that there's big interest in it.
Now, I'm going to ask you a very personal question, and you don't have to answer it on the wireless, but give us a ballpark figure. How old are you?
How old? Oh, no, as I put in that on Facebook, I says I'm an old man. I'm 75.
Okay, and you... I
don't mind you put my age out. It doesn't mind me.
No. Well, it's nice to get to 75, isn't it? And it sounds like there's many more years to come. But why at 75?
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
So.
Why at 70? And I bet your family does as well. Why at 75 did you decide to go to Maori lessons?
Well, I don't know. Oh, we've got Maori friends. Two of our Paul's our own child, but two of our other children we adopted, and they're both part Maori. They don't really know Maori, but and because they've got a bit of heritage, I just thought I'd like to know a bit of Maori myself. We've got quite a few friends in different parts of New Zealand, particularly up around Rotorua way. And I thought it'd be nice to be able to go there and just have a small conversation with someone in their language. I don't want to just a few sentences, things like that.
Yeah. And also, I mean, just the name, Roto, Lake, Rua, too, right? So just to know basic stuff like that.
Yep, that's dead right. Yeah, and like if you're going somewhere and you want to ask directions or something, or if you're in a restaurant and you just wanted to start, particularly when you wanted to do it in Maori, it'd be nice to be able to do that sort of thing. And I mean, some of the Maori friends that we have, they can't speak Maori themselves, so I'm just wanting to learn to do it. I just thought you're never too old to do things. I mean, when I was about 40, I left school when I was in the second form, so I never got school certificate. So when I got into about 40, I thought, I wouldn't mind having a go at school certificate. So I ended up getting school certificate through correspondence thing, and then I thought I'd have a go at sixth form certificate. So I did that as well. So I thought to myself, you're never too old to do things.
No, you're not. And is it? And also, is it about respect for the language and the people? Is that part of why you're doing this?
I think so, yes, because I like the language. I like listening to it. I like the music. I actually find, even sometimes at our church there, we have some of our hymns sung in Maori, and I actually find it's easier to sing it than to actually say it.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems to be easier to sing it. And, I don't know, it's just nice. I just think it's great.
So who else was there last night? As you looked around the room, hundreds of people. What sort of people were they?
Oh, all sorts. I was surprised. I thought there'd be a lot of young people there, but there was probably a lot of elderly people like me. There was everyone from I didn't really see any young ones, I suppose. The young ones, I suppose, probably about 20 or so. I didn't think younger than that, but it was just a big mixture of everyone. Male, female, all ages.
Yeah, lovely.
That's why I was very surprised when I looked around. I think even the teacher doing it, I think he must have been very surprised at what he's seen around the place, because it'll be interesting actually next week to go again to see whether they'll get the same crowd. Some may pull away, but I don't think so, because he made it so easy, you know. It was just like starting off at school and you're learning something, and he just made it so easy for everyone, and I think that's what maybe was so good about it.
Right, so let's have a test. What's the giant lake in the middle of the North Island called?
Taupo. Tupo.
Toe as in on your foot, and paw as in, you know.
Yeah, Tupo.
Taupo.
Well, see, our English there, I always think of it as Taupo, but it is, I know it's Tupo.
And this is the thing, isn't it? It's a habit of a lifetime that we're overcoming, isn't it? When all you've done is speak English, suddenly you're kind of starting from scratch, aren't you? You're starting again.
Yeah. Well, see, I like some of these hyphenated ones, like with Mount Cook now, Mount Aoraki, what does it,
Aoraki.
That's like Mount Aoraki. Things like that, I think they're quite good to have. You know, to have the different ones, and I just think it's part of New Zealand, it's part of our history. That's what he was talking about last night, about Maori and how, you know, you got all these myths, but it's all part of their history sort of thing, and we just got to take it for what it is. And I don't know, it's New Zealand, it's part of us.
What a dude, said Katrina as she wandered in about Jimmy LeCompte, and you're texting in the same thing. This is lovely from Robin. One of my late mother's regrets was that she lived in New Zealand her whole life and couldn't speak Maori. She loved the wonderful movement in the language and regretted never knowing what was said. And Amanda says, what an inspiring 75-year-old. Can we have more good news stories like this, please. It's lovely hearing people try, isn't it? And that's the point that the Maori speakers that I know and admire, Guyan is doing such a great job leading from the front on Morning Report, and Julian Wilcox, who's a wonderful man who works with Ngāi Tahu down in Canterbury. Despite that, I should say he's a hardcore Hurricanes fan, and he says, JC, no one ever minds if you make the effort, if you try, which goes back to my favourite quote about journalism from Martha Gellhorn when she was asked why she spent her entire life filing reports from the middle of nowhere, Central America, that no one really in the US was reading except for the Washington Post on page 73 of the foreign section. And she said, all my life I've thrown small stones into a large pond and I have no idea whether they made even the slightest ripple, but I don't need to worry about that. My responsibility was the effort. And I think that's a beautiful way to describe journalism and also learning the Indigenous language of this country.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. A chance meeting with a Jehovah's Witness helped a teenager who was sold for sex by her mother to report the exploitation to police. The mother, Casimir Lata, and her partner Avnish Segal have both now been jailed for receiving earnings for sexually exploiting the teenager who was 15 at the time. Jessie Chang reports.
In the High Court in Auckland today, Avnish Segal was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison. Lata was jailed last month for nearly 7 years, a sentence the Crown is now appealing. But the case may have been undiscovered if the teenager had not earlier struck up a friendship with a Jehovah's Witness. RNZ understands they met when the Jehovah's Witness was going door to door in the teenager's neighbourhood. When the pair met up again much later, the girl revealed what had been happening and the woman helped her report it to the police. Ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
The Justice Minister Andrew Little says he's hearing on a regular basis that Housing New Zealand is refusing to take in people who are on bail or parole. The government has ruled out building a new mega prison, but is still considering what it will do to contain the country's burgeoning prison population. Part of that is managing people eligible for bail, but who don't have a suitable house to go to. While Housing New Zealand does not have a formal policy of refusing people on bail, Andrew Little says it's happening anyway.
I am having this raised routinely with me by lawyers at the coalface, defence lawyers and Crown prosecutors, telling me that applications for bail to a Housing New Zealand address are being routinely denied by Housing New Zealand.
The Justice Minister. Housing New Zealand, meanwhile, has released a statement saying it's always housed people on remand or bail if they're existing tenants or a family member or friend of an existing tenant. One of Australia's most prominent clerics, the Catholic Archbishop of Adelaide, has been found guilty of covering up child sexual abuse. Philip Wilson is the most senior Catholic cleric to be convicted for covering up the actions of paedophile priests. From Sydney, the BBC's Phil Mercer reports.
The Archbishop was accused of covering up abuse by a paedophile priest in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales in the 1970s. Philip Wilson, who held a junior position in the Catholic Church at the time, faces up to 2 years in prison. His lawyers said he had no knowledge of offences committed against a child by a member of the clergy, who was later convicted of sexual abuse and died in prison in 2006. But a magistrate said the evidence against Archbishop Wilson was truthful and reliable.
Phil Mercer. The Foreign Minister Winston Peters will travel to China on Thursday for a formal meeting with his counterpart, China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Mr Peters says they will have in-depth discussions on important regional trade and security issues, including North Korea. While in China, Mr Peters will also meet other Chinese leaders and members of the business community. The group representing property investors says when tenants sublet properties without permission, it puts the owner at risk. A Wellington tenant sublet his Taranaki Street apartment 54 times last year on Airbnb before the owners noticed and contacted him. The Tenancy Tribunal has ordered Jeff Walter Patterson to pay the owners $11,500 for unpaid rent, Airbnb profits and other damages. Andrew King from the Property Investors Federation says an owner's insurance may be voided if a flat was used as an Airbnb without their knowledge.
The damage that is caused may turn out to be their responsibility, or the tenant may be limited in their responsibility, and also any insurance may actually be voided from it, so it puts them in a pretty vulnerable position.
Andrew King from the Property Investors Federation. The Minister of Māori Development has indicated job losses may be on the way for Māori television. Nanae Mahuta says she's received a letter from the outgoing chair of the board, Georgina Te Hiuhiu, about the financial challenges the network is facing. Ms Mahuta says she doesn't know the details of how many jobs could go.
And it would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment because there are other pressures impacting on the decisions that the board needs to make about its sustainability.
Māori Television has not had a production funding increase from the Māori Broadcasting Funding Agency, Te Mangai Pāho, since 2004. Indonesia's most active volcano, Mount Merapi, is showing signs of a potential major eruption. Authorities have ordered villagers living on its slopes to leave and tourists to keep away. The volcano on the densely populated island of Java has been experiencing a series of small eruptions with plumes of smoke and ash billowing into the sky. A series of eruptions in 2010 killed more than 350 people. It's 6:05. Sport. The Commonwealth Games boxing champion won't be taking any extra security precautions after getting back his stolen gold medal. 3 weeks ago, the medal David Nika won at the men's heavy 91-kilogram boxing final was taken from his car in Hamilton. Nika had all but given up on getting the medal back, but got a call from police today to say they'd recovered it. Despite the theft, Nika says he has no intention of hiding the medal away.
I'll put it under another seat in my car or something like that. I don't know. I'll keep going around to schools and various sponsors and show it to family and friends and stuff. So I'll keep doing what I do. But eventually it'll end up in a frame along with my other one.
Hamilton boxer David Nika. The Crusaders are hoping to minimise the loss of 4 All Blacks by bringing back 2 from injury for Friday night's Super Rugby match against the Hurricanes in Christchurch. The 2 sides sit at the top of the New Zealand Conference. The Crusaders will be without All Black props Owen Franks and Joe Moody, who were suspended. Midfielder Ryan Crotty is out with concussion, while Captain Sam Whitelock is also in doubt with a head knock. Returning from injury, however, are outside back Israel Dagg and lock Luke Romano. And the Cleveland Cavaliers have levelled their NBA Eastern Conference basketball finals at 2 games all after beating the Boston Celtics 111-102 in Game 4. Game 5 in the best-of-7 series is on Thursday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples new music from Arctic Monkeys, Ry Cooder and Tammy Nielsen. Our Tuesday feature ponders the institution of marriage, because it seems a lot of folk are still getting hitched. And John Thornley presents this month's Song of the Spirit, a collaboration between Moana Maniapoto and Don McGlashan.
And between 10 and 11 p.m, join me, Karen Hay, for Lately. We'll be focusing on the events of the day, both nationally and internationally, and talking to the newsmakers in an eclectic mix that covers everything from the arts to politics to live events. That's Lately with Karen Hay in the 10 p.m. hour, weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered showers turning to rain and squally thunderstorms for a time overnight. Further showers tomorrow with thunderstorms and hail north of Levin. Localised damaging wind gusts from late evening until early tomorrow morning. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine today, northwest gales in exposed places tonight. Tomorrow a period of early rain, then fine breaks and isolated showers. For Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain and thunderstorms for a time this evening. Showers retreating to the ranges tomorrow. Northwest gales severe in exposed places until tonight. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms easing this evening. Further thunderstorms with hail overnight and tomorrow morning, then clearing south of Hokitika. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain in the west, spreading elsewhere at times today. Showers tomorrow, with snow lowering to 300 to 400 metres in Otago and Southland. Northwest gales in exposed places easing today. The Chatham Islands, fine spells at first, with rain developing tomorrow. And I think that's why people are being warned maybe to have chains with them and to maybe not drive in the snow if you don't
have to.
If you don't have to, if you're not used to it. It is 8.5 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Talking of the weather in the South Island, it's a northerly in Christchurch, so it won't be bitterly cold, but we're getting some reports of a few power outages. I'm just looking at the Iran website, just trying to find out what's going on. If you are suddenly without electricity in Christchurch, do text us 2101. We're just trying to work out, looks like a few hundred homes may be affected. We're not sure why. We'll get back to it if we can find out more. But let's return now to Mycoplasma bovis and to some of the questions you raised via text and email last night. How did it spread? Why wasn't its containment more effective and better enforced? Why are cows still being moved? And so on. We asked those questions as the number of infected farms sits officially at just below 40, but does look set to rise, potentially dramatically. And we asked those questions a week and a half before a time of mass movement in the dairy industry, June 1st, Gypsy Day. To understand how hard it is to respond to Mycoplasma bovis, you have to understand something about the bacterial infection itself. One article in a magazine for beef farmers considered whether stealthy or opportunistic is the best description. Well, maybe both. But when care and caution is required, we're about to hear of stock farmers bought thinking it was from a safe zone that 2 weeks earlier had been in the highest risk area of New Zealand, and a small number of other farmers who bought stock cheap because it was from a high risk zone itself, and therefore not commanding the same price. Let's begin with the bacteria itself.
It's a tricky little devil, this Mycoplasma. It comes, it lands, it sort of has a delayed fuse, and it's spread before you even know it has arrived.
That's Keith Woodford, formerly Professor of Agribusiness at Lincoln University, now Principal Consultant at Agri Food Systems Limited. So, if it's a tricky little devil, what do you do? Well, when I spoke to Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor, he'd just come out of a meeting to discuss exactly that.
Look, it's a hard call. We have always focused on eradication as being the best outcome for New Zealand farmers and for the country, in fact.
But, says Keith Woodford,
I can't find anywhere in the world where there has been a coordinated national response to get rid of it.
And therein lies the problem. Eradication sounds compelling, but it's never worked anywhere. And movement bans, well, for contaminated stock, yes, of course. But widespread injunctions against movement create problems of their own. Why?
In much of the South Island, we winter the cows on different properties than where we milk them. So we've got a situation at the moment where the cows are just ready to go to their wintering farms, but they can't go there. So we've got the cows in one place, we've got the feed in another place. Now, if this isn't handled really, really carefully, we're actually going to have an animal welfare problem, which will be exactly because of the restrictions that are being put in place.
In short, New Zealand farmers move stock about. In winter, they move to where the root crops await them. Food, glorious food. Fodder beet, for example. So prohibitions against movement sound sensible as part of a centrally coordinated campaign, but not for hungry stock.
The danger with those is that the cure becomes worse than the disease.
I wanted to talk to farmers about this where M. bovis isn't, so I called Northland. And just to be sure, I asked, do you think M. bovis is in the north yet?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
That's Northland Federated Farmers President John Blackwell. He thinks it's arrived with purchased stock, and farmers have been careful. Caveat emptor, yes.
And if they've come from a hot area in the South Island, we wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. But...
And the but here is crucial and revealing. John Blackwell gives an example.
I've known of cases recently where the farmers have wanted to buy bull calves, signed a contract in August 2017, which they normally do, delivery on the 1st of January. And they got them out of Waikato.
At that stage, Waikato was no too low risk. All the M. bovis, what little had been found, was in the south. But those Waikato cows...
In actual fact, they came from the South Island only 2 weeks prior.
So farmers were buying stock from a safe zone, not knowing the stock was actually from a hot zone. And hot zone stock, well, it was selling cheap.
Some farmers have bought these cattle in the South Island and taking a risk, which is, risking all of us, because South Island people didn't want to buy them, so they were very cheap and they could land them up here cheaper. So then that was another market. And there are some farmers that, we're all privateers and we can pretty well do what we want to a degree, but that's a terrific call to make, putting us all at risk.
That sounded almost reckless to me, so I put it to the Minister. Discounted stock from M. bovis hot zones. Has the Minister heard about this?
Yes, I have. Yes, and I've heard of situations, specific sales going on. Now, if it's not an infected property, there's nothing to stop those sales occurring.
Back to the Minister in a moment, but Keith Woodford's point is that even if the government can't prescribe a one-size-fits-all response, it can ensure stock comes with an almost forensic provenance.
And what we do have to have in place is strict protocols so that when a farmer is selling animals to another farmer, then the purchasing farmer does actually get full information as to what the situation is. Now, to a large extent, that's happening. All the farmers that I know, if they're forced to bring in animals from elsewhere, are checking back and really checking closely to try and understand the full history.
Knowledge is power. If people know what stock is highest risk, they won't buy it, and if they don't buy it, they reduce contamination. Of course, farmers are rigorously cautious now, but the bovis has already bolted. Back to the Minister.
I think this was discovered in July last year. I think there was a slow and lax start to that because it didn't potentially affect our trade. So people saw this not in the same way that foot and mouth would be perceived. That is, that our borders would be shut immediately. This is not an issue for human health or consumption of milk or meat, and it doesn't affect our trade. So I think there was a bit of a slack approach to the first discovery, and then there was a election looming, and so I believe that there was a action could have been taken but wasn't. But that's all spilt milk.
Yes, it is, says John Blackwell, but let's not spill it again.
There's no country in the world that has eradicated Mycoplasma, so it's going to be really difficult. New Zealand will be the first if we can do it, and the odds are every week that goes by it's less and less likely. What needs to come out of this now is that a full inquiry should be done independently so we can learn from our mistakes, because we're lucky this is only Mycoplasma and not something more serious like foot and mouth.
So fed farmers in Northland agree with Keith Woodford. We must know exactly where stock comes from. No opting out, no half stories. Knowledge is power.
And when we're buying cattle in, we'd like to know the full history of where these cattle have come from, right from birth.
Keith Woodford says the issue is complex, but blunt solutions may imperil uncontaminated stock, and they have no history of working anywhere.
So yes, these are profound problems, and there's no easy solutions, but my view is that it's actually best for farmers to try and work out the solutions for themselves.
Aided by full knowledge about the stock they might be buying. The problem is cows are moved, as Keith Woodford told us, over winter in some parts of the country. If they don't move, they starve, which means whole herds moved at the start of winter every year. Paul Blackwell knows of cows that have been moved up to 10 times. Damien O'Connor?
You know, we've not had the restrictions they have in most other countries, certainly in the UK and Europe and to a lesser extent in the US. You know, we have been able to move animals around. I think that's going to change. This has woken us all up to the importance of actually not only knowing, you know, where cattle go, but actually trying to reduce the movements as much as we can.
And what of stock that simply has to be moved? Remember, June 1st is known as Gypsy Day.
You should take the basic precautions. You know, trucks are now being cleaned so that there's no possible spread through the trucks themselves. Knowing that the property you're going on to is free of Mycoplasma bovis, knowing that, you know, you're going to a trusted farmer, and all of those basic things there are absolute requirements of any shift. And so while it would be virtually impossible to stop the movement of animals because of the feed requirements, there'd be huge animal welfare issues, we've got to be cautious as we go through this movement day on June the 1st.
That is the Minister of Agriculture. We wanted to talk to his predecessor, Nathan Guy, but he wasn't available for interviews today. Also in that story, John Blackwell from Federated Farmers in Northland and Keith Woodford. Of course, it's 18 minutes past 6. New Zealand is hoping for the best as the European Union prepares to decide whether to formally approve free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand at a meeting tonight. That's negotiations. The deal, based on EU modelling, could result in billions of extra dollars in trade for New Zealand each year. Australian media are reporting the mandate will be approved by the EU's Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels. But Trade Minister David Parker, well, maybe didn't want to tempt fate. He certainly didn't want to go that far.
Well, we're hoping for the best. It's on the agenda for the European Union to consider whether they give their trade negotiators a mandate to commence the free trade agreement negotiations with New Zealand.
It's been like, what, a decade in coming? I mean, good to
It's been a long time. It's been hanging in the balance even until very recently, and of course the Prime Minister made that the focus of her efforts in Europe in her meeting with President Macron and Chancellor Merkel. So, just rewards for good efforts.
Reports out of Australia saying that a mandate will be approved. Are you similarly optimistic?
We don't count anything until it's done. So, no, we don't count our chickens before they've hatched.
So just to confirm that there's no real parameters around that at this stage?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's no specific parameters. We've already got a rule of what is and isn't available to be negotiated. In the New Zealand mandate, for example, we always require a Treaty of Waitangi clause. I'm sure the Europeans will have similar generalisations in their negotiating mandate. But a lot of the details are never seen to the public because it's a matter that's negotiated and neither side wants to completely show their hand. We hope to have the European Trade Commissioner Malmström here within a month. It's a really important initiative to us, absolute priority, and we're doing everything we can to smooth the way.
David Parker speaking to reporters at Parliament earlier this afternoon. Two-way trade with the EU, including the UK, is currently just in excess of $20 billion. The EU estimates a free trade agreement could boost New Zealand's GDP by between $1.2 and $2 billion and boost exports by 10 to 20%. Obviously, we'll keep an eye on what's going on there. More and more retailers are ditching plastic bags for compostable ones. But are they really better for the environment? Countdown began scrapping plastic bags in 10 of its supermarkets this week, and the warehouse also plans to replace them later in the year with bags it says decompose in 12 weeks. But the Sustainability Trust fears most of the new bags will still end up in the landfill. Sapia Meiron reports.
Environment-conscious consumers have a lot to celebrate. More and more retailers are trying to say bye-bye to plastic bags. But Nadia Piontek from the Sustainability Trust says retailers like the warehouse are missing a crucial step. She says while their changes are positive, compostable plastic bags require commercial compost facilities to break down properly.
The catch is that there isn't a clear pathway for these bags to get to the compost facilities, and in fact there are only 11 compost facilities in New Zealand that are set up to take these products.
Ms Piontek says she's worried these bags will end up in landfill anyway.
Unless they are recaptured and taken to a composting service purposefully, if they just end up in the landfill or even in compost, they are indistinguishable from a plastic bag, and therefore the compost service will just take them out. It actually makes more work for the compost service and there's no benefit.
She says people could use their own compost, but the bags take much longer to break down, and household composts, which are cooler than industrial ones, could only handle a few bags at a time. The founder of Beyond the Bin, Kim Renshaw, agrees.
I think they can be home composted, but I think they can't be home composted on scale. If you put one thing in there and give it a good turn, it's going to be fine. But if you start putting heaps of these products in there, it's certainly not going to break down very easily, and it's probably not going to really add a lot of value to your garden either.
Ms Renshaw says even though there are companies who take compostable packaging, not all will be able to take the new bags.
Just because a composting facility says that they can process a type of material doesn't necessarily mean that there's a service provider in place to take this material to the facility. It also doesn't mean that they can take loads and loads of larger volumes of a particular product either.
Tuako-based EnviroFert is one of 11 industrial composters in New Zealand. It collects and receives green waste and compostable packaging from the Auckland, Waikato and Bay of Plenty regions. But its site manager Paul Yearbury says misinformation about which packaging is compostable causes them problems.
Well, there's biodegradable films and then there's true compostable packaging, which is generally cornstarch based. We have a 22-week composting cycle, and anything biodegradable just doesn't fit into our time frame.
Mr Yearbury says national standards are needed to make sure there is continuity across the industry. Right now there are too many products with different composting standards in the marketplace. From a composter's perspective, standards protect their ability to produce healthy compost for farmers.
From our point of view, it's for people to prove to us that these products are not going to harm our compost, because that's what we've got to protect at the end of the day, because, I mean, it goes off to kiwi fruit growers and veggie growers and things like that, you know.
Consumers wanting to ensure their compostable plastics don't end up in landfill can sign up to an organic waste collection service, but they'll be paying for the privilege. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Sapir Mayron.
And we contacted the warehouse to see what their thoughts were on dealing with compostable bags. It says in an email the bags are new to New Zealand, so processes and customer knowledge will take time to develop. You pay people to write sentences like that, don't you? But if it had waited for more public understanding, it would be delaying the challenge. The warehouse says the worst case scenario is that the new bags end up at the landfill, where they will still decompose 10 times faster than the plastic bags and leave zero toxic impact at the end of the process. Landfill, not landfalls. Sorry, everyone. In his first major speech, America's new top diplomat has threatened Iran with the strongest sanctions in history and called for support from allies to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Earlier this month, the US President Donald Trump pulled his country out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. It was left to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to outline the administration's new Iran policy. From Washington, here's the ABC's Zoe Daniel.
Stepping out to deliver his first key policy address, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo lashed out at Iran, accusing it of using funds from the nuclear deal to fuel proxy wars across the Middle East and then lying about it.
Iran's leaders saw a deal as the starting gun for the march across the Middle East.
The new Secretary of State listed 12 demands, among them that Iran must stop uranium enrichment, provide uninhibited access to nuclear sites throughout the country, and end development and testing of ballistic missiles. If Iran doesn't reverse course, Mr Pompeo says, the US will continue to squeeze it through tighter sanctions than ever.
The Iranian regime should know that this is just the beginning. The sting of sanctions will be painful if the regime does not change its course.
If Iran complies,
we're happy at that point to reestablish full diplomatic and commercial relationships with Iran. And we're prepared to admit Iran to have advanced technology.
It's the most robust outline of an Iran strategy from the Trump administration and comes just 2 weeks after it withdrew from the landmark agreement reached by Barack Obama's administration in 2015. That withdrawal has been largely opposed internationally, but Mike Pompeo wants international support for a new strategy.
I want the Australians, the Bahrainis, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Japanese, the Jordanians, the Kuwaitis, the Omanis, the Qataris, the Saudi Arabians, South Korea, the UAE, and many, many others worldwide to join in this effort against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
The Secretary of State points to progress with North Korea as evidence of the Trump administration's credentials. In response, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani told the US to stay out of the region. Tehran has previously indicated that it will attempt to stay in the deal with the remaining nations, however reserves the right to continue enrichment efforts. Speaking at the confirmation hearing for new CIA Director Gina Haspel, President Trump reiterated his hardline approach to world affairs.
Instead of apologising for our nation, we are standing up for our nation. And we are standing up for the men and women who protect our nation.
A Pentagon spokesman says the US military will take all necessary steps to confront Iranian behaviour in the region and is still assessing whether that could include new actions or doubling down on current ones.
Zoe Daniel there from Washington, 27.5 minutes past 6, just before we go tonight, just in case you thought you'd heard the last of the royal wedding. We've got one more story.
If you're watching, consider yourself blessed. What you're seeing is a life-size creation of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle made entirely of sponge cake. Everything from faces made from modelling chocolate to eyes made from poured sugar were carefully sculptured over 6 weeks by amateur British baker Lara Mason. Now, Lara used 300 eggs, 15 kilos of flour, 15 kilos of butter, National Heart Foundation tick, 15 kilos of sugar to whip up the sponges, and then she used 10 kilos of buttercream to sandwich the layers together, wrapped in roughly 50 kilos of fondant icing. The sponges were then loaded onto a base made of metal and wood, and voila, a 6'1", forgive metric, but this is England, size Harry, complete with beard and brogues, yes, actual brogues, and a 5'6" Megan with perfect white teeth, long hair and heels made out of cake, life-size cake. Lara says the couple's clothes were based on their engagement photo, and she estimates it took her 250 hours all up to pull this triumph together. She said she made the cake to celebrate the royal wedding, but also to encourage others to take up the hobby of sugarcraft. The cake, commissioned by one of the biggest cake shows in the world, Cake International, will be showcased in Birmingham in November. Sadly, that's well past its best before date. Not even sure what to make of that, because if you were listening, it's just a whole lot of figures about eggs and sugar and stuff, cake, constant use of the word cake, but if you were watching, it was really quite extraordinary. I mean, there they were, life-size Meghan and Harry, made of cake. Unbelievable. And I think we'll probably end our royal coverage there, much to the delight of many of you and the consternation of 2 or 3 of you who really quite enjoy it. Sadly, the Mycoplasma bovis fiasco worsens because science is conspicuously missing from the dialogue. The most obvious question avoided is, what is bovis? Is it a bacterium, or is the myco prefix suggests a fungus? Come on, Joan, you guys, no pun intended, have got to get real, says Jeff from Stratford. We will, Jeff. And I thought we answered some of those questions, but if we didn't, we'll try again tomorrow. Thanks, Jeff. And my school certificate science teacher at Welling College will be just so proud of me. See you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A teenager sold for sex by her mother and her partner was encouraged by a friend who's a Jehovah's Witness to report it to police. The Justice Minister says he's been told that applications for bail are being routinely denied by Housing New Zealand. MPI says all cases of the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis stemmed from a Southland farm owned by Alphonse Zeestraten. And one of Australia's most prominent clerics, the Catholic Archbishop of Adelaide, has been found guilty of covering up child sexual abuse. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Jesus in the day spa. Arctic Monkeys play their version of space-age lounge music. Rai Kuda offers his version of country gospel. I'm Nick Bollinger, and I'll be reviewing both these recent musical excursions in the sampler. And I'll be previewing